begin en die einde, die weg en die waarheid, die koning van my hart, U is die seun van.
Baie welkom by die Vita Woordskool. Vandag met hierdie video het ek vir jou 'n bietjie van 'n verrassing, iets anderste en iets baie spesiaal. Die agtergrond van dit wat ek vir jou graag nou wil wys, ek gaan dit vir jou in 2 video's wys. Ons gaan nou die eerste video bekend maak en dan so oor 'n paar dae van nou af as die Here wil, dan maak ons die tweede video ook beskikbaar. Gaan oor die lewe van 'n man met die naam van Robson. Nou Mark Robson het ek hier in Hermanus omgewing ontmoet so 'n paar jaar gelede, want hy ry 'n Land Rover en ek ry 'n Land Rover en daar's iets oor Land Rover eienaars wat baie snaaks is en hulle sien mekaar altyd raak, groet mekaar en so het hy gestop by 'n plek en ek stop toe langs hom en praat met hom oor sy Land Rover. En dit het baie vinnig uitgekom dat Mark is 'n gelowige. Hy's 'n Christen, hy's 'n disipel van Jesus. En hy's ook in die bediening, maar hy's in hierdie baie spesiale bediening wat bekend staan as die Rescue Services Chaplain. Hy's 'n Rescue Services Chaplain. Ek kry dit nou 'n bietjie verkeerd daar, maar jy kry gou die idee. So vir die nooddienste mense is hy dan in die bediening in 'n predikant, 'n kapelaan. En dit was vir my geweldig interessant, nie net het hy 'n mooi interessante Land Rover nie, maar hy is ook 'n man met 'n vurige hart vir die Here. En soos die tyd verbygaan, kom ek agter, maar hy is eintlik op 'n baie kosbare manier 'n baie spesiale sendeling. Iemand wat te maak het of werk met mense wat feitelik elke liewe dag in die oorlog is, of daar die oorlog misdaad is, geweld is, onluste, onrus, of dit is brande, veldbrande, vuur, brandstigting, of dit is mense wat terminaal siek is, ongelukke op die paaie, die mense wat hiermee werk elke liewe dag, is hy 'n sendeling voor, en hy het baie kosbare getuienis, en ek wil dit baie graag met jou deel, maar een spesifieke verhaal, voordat ek jou bekendstel aan Mark Robson, is, ek kry 'n vriend van my wat nou die dag bel uit Sutherland, en hy sê, 'n vriend van hom, sy seun, is terminaal in die hospitaal, kan ek nie net daar by hom 'n draai gaan maak nie, en ek het so vir 'n dag of 2 met die gedagte geloop, hoe gaan ek nou daar inkom, want ek's nie bekend aan die mediese personeel hier in die hospitale nie, ek sal aan besoektye moet gaan, ek kan nie buite besoektye nie, en ek wonder hoe gaan ek dit maak werk, en ek kry toe die idee, bel vir Mark Robson, want hy sal dalk vir my kan help met raad. Ek bel toe vir Mark, en hy sê vir my, ja, hy ken hierdie man, hy ken hom baie goed, en hy wil maar net vir my sê, dat die vorige dag van ons gesprek, het hierdie jong man sy lewe vir Jesus gegee. Nou hierdie jong man is intussen tyd oorlede, maar Mark was die sleutelfiguur in hierdie man se lewe om ook aan hom die evangelie van die genade van Jesus Christus bekend te maak in hierdie kritiese tyd van sy lewe. Nou Mark het baie sulke getuienisse en ek het net gedink, dit sal wonderlik wees as ons 'n kykie kan kry in die lewe van iemand waarvan jy en ek dalk glad nie bewus is nie, maar wat deur Jesus gebruik word elke dag in die groot benoudhede en traumas van mense se lewe om ook by hulle uit te bring die evangelie van die genade van God deur Jesus Christus.
Hi, I'm Mark Robson. I was born in 1967 in Boksburg and grew up most of my time in Boksburg and Benoni. I went to primary school in Boksburg and then moved to high school in Benoni. My dad was a school teacher and then a principal in Benoni and went to school. And then after school, as all of us used to do in those days, went to the Defence Force. In the Defence Force was really an interesting time for me because I was trained to do some security work and medical work within the Defence Force, but I was allocated to an amazing group that worked under the Chaplain General. And that was incredible for me because I was able to do my singing and I play the bagpipes as well within the group, but then without too many people knowing, looking after the safety and security of the group going around. And part of the purpose of the group was actually to be out on the road, looking after our men in uniform and also their parents, and telling them that God is present even in the Defence Force, and that they would be offered the comfort of having Jesus in their life as well over that time. After being in the Defence Force, I started to study and started studying accounting. And I went through, and while I was busy doing that, I was still busy, very active in the church with the youth groups and that. And I had the toss up in my mind what to study. But I had the feeling to start off with accounting, and I studied a BCom degree first. Through UNISA, I started studying through UNISA because that enabled me still to compete, playing the bagpipes, and to be at home so that it didn't cost so much for my folks. We studied accounting, and as I was going through the studying of my BCom, the tinkling in my head, you must study theology, came to mind. But when asking God about when I must do this, he said, wait. So I patiently and impatiently didn't wait, and waited, and started doing my local preachers whilst I was busy studying my BCom through the Methodist Church. And finished my BCom, and at the end of the BCom, the thoughts were again, now where to? And I had the feeling again, at that stage it was the crisis, one of the American crises that they had, where there was a war going on, and we couldn't get our textbooks. So I actually had an extra year, and I studied by choice other subjects as well. And when I got to study my honours degree, there was a choice, either honours or theology. I started asking around, and one of my professors at UNISA said to me, but Mark, I can't believe the subjects you chose as your additional subjects fit perfectly in the honours you wanted to do. So I continued doing the honours, but still wanting to do theology. And at the end of my honours degree, the Lord blessed me with amazing results, confirming that I should have done that. But then I started studying theology through UNISA. And what an amazing journey that was. And looking back at it, how the Lord, even in my ministry now, uses the financial qualification to assist in terms of the people that I see quite often, and to give me a different understanding. But I studied all my studies through, well, not all of them, most of them through UNISA. I spent some time with ICI University studying theology. And when I'd finished studying my BCom, I actually started working in the commerce industry, because we all need to have money for our old escorts that we ride, or getting to work and our little things. So I started working then, and as I developed along, as I say, started with the theology studies and just carried on. And currently I'm halfway through a master's degree in theology, which we put on hold for a while, but it's within trauma and crisis management. It first started off with youth and young adult ministry, but I had a strong feeling, because of the area that I'm working in, is it's better to do it in something that is more practical for what I'm doing. So after the theological studies, I then had kind of finished studying, but I'd along the way started seeing most of my ministry time was actually outside of the church. Although I led worship and preached within the church, a lot of the work was more within the emergency services industry and with men and women in uniform, because I felt that it was so necessary, because there was nothing really that was taking care of them. And having been there myself, it felt that it was drastically necessary. And I started developing that and ministry towards people that worked with other people. So during, I think it was in 2010, I was fortunate to have a place in Hartbeespoort where I worked, but I had a place where people that were either psychologists or ministers or paramedics or firemen or people that worked with people could actually come to a place on a farm, and we could actually have time of ministry together, and it was really awesome. And then I started the emergency services chaplaincy about 25 years ago. We started up in Benoni in the East Rand area with the sole purpose of taking care of our men and women in uniform, because it was so important, so that they could be taken care of in an environment where nobody kind of understands them and understands the needs that they have and can come, if you can call it, to their level. And it was really a privilege to start that and then start the development of the trauma environment around them. So a lot of the things would be going to a scene and stopping them having to call a resuscitation where they've already worked on a patient and battled it out and the patient has passed away, and now they have to say we're stopping the treatment, and then they have to tell the family, and we would take on that role as well and then do the counselling of them and the support, which would have been our community or our church, if you can call it that, where we would look after the staff, but our short-term treatment would be to the people that were involved in the trauma. And that developed up until we did training courses we developed together, starting from the training courses that we got from overseas initially. And then from there on, I think it was in 2012 that I moved down to the Cape. My folks had moved down to the Cape beforehand, and I decided it was the right place to come because it was such a beautiful place. And I thought I was going to have a breakdown in the Cape and put my feet up a little bit from that part of the ministry, because it's quite taxing. And when I moved down to Hermanus, it wasn't a couple of months that I was here and found the intense need of the service people. And there was somebody in the environment also that had committed suicide, but they'd actually asked people for help and there was nobody to look after them. And it was quite a privilege for me to be able to be called in through people that I knew to be able to help and start chatting to the people. And then had the feeling to approach one of the senior traffic officers to say, can we not come and offer a service and help? And his first words to me were, Mark, we need to go and see the fire chief immediately. And he took me to his office. And after discussing that, the fire chief said, you came as if God sent you here immediately. And I thought, here goes my time of putting my feet up. God had other plans. And from there, we've developed the chaplaincy within our area, in the Overberg and Overstrand area. But I was still working and doing a commercial work to fund it. And then from there, it was when the fires were in, I think it was about 5 years ago, it was longer than 5 years ago, when the fires were in Knysna, I had a calling that I needed to do this full time. And I registered an NPO specifically to do that. And that's where we started developing the chaplaincy further through the NPO. I still am linked to the chaplaincy that we had that functioned in Joburg. Or in the East Rand area, and now we're starting to get representation right throughout the country of people and providing 24/7 somebody to chat to. Here was amazing because one day there was a lady of 85 that had tried to commit suicide and went into casualty, and I'd been praying after having had that other incident that stimulated the starting in the area, that there could be an opening to have somebody 24/7. And one of the paramedics that we had spent lots of time counselling, and that happened to be in casualty, when the doctor who is the head of casualty was trying to find a psychologist to be able to look after the lady and take care of her, and nobody was available because it was after hours. And how awesome it was that God worked through this paramedic to say, but why don't you call Mark to come and to come and help? And I got the phone call from the doctor, after which I went to see the lady, and we walked a path with her, and she's fine, which is the most important part. But the doctor called me afterwards on the Monday and said, you must come and see me. Will you start something up at our hospital 24/7 so that there's somebody available? And up to today, there's somebody 24/7 available for being able to chat to people should they need it. And that's really exciting for me, how God has turned things around and the answer to prayer to make that. And since then, I can't even count the number of people that we've been privileged to have come to us. I think for me was the first privilege I had is I grew up in a home where my mum and dad served the Lord. And my dad specifically had an amazing gift that I watched as I grew up. He was a principal, and how God worked through him and was able to be a way changer in terms of the education up in the East Rand. And in fact, he was known at the time for nationwide as how he brought God into the school and how the results changed. So that was for me a wonderful education of being able to see how God is at work in reality, not in how it is in the Bible necessarily. Obviously, dis 'n voorbeeld of wat daar aangaan, en dis vir my 'n voorreg om dit te kon gesien het, hoe die Bybel en die Here in aksie is, en dit is waar en hoe hy in geloof gewerk het. En hy was die jongste hoof in die land op daai stadium gewees, wat eintlik meer van 'n wonderwerk was. So vir my was dit ongelooflik om dit te gaan sien, maar soos wat ek groot geword het, moes ek my eie besluit geneem het. En ek dink dit was in vroeë hoërskool, ek het nie 'n spesifieke datum nie, maar dat ek dieper en dieper na die Here toe gekom het, tot 'n punt toe wat ek kon besluit het, weet jy, ek moet hierdie besluit neem, want dis die enigste ding wat ek kan doen, wat ek nou die Here gesien het in soveel maniere. And I think going through the schooling that I did with my dad there, it was also in a way a schooling of its own for me. Because of him being there, I became a target in a lot of ways, and I had to deal with a lot of things on my own, and how God intervened. En dit was vir my amazing om hom in aksie te voel as ek hom vra. En dan kan ek onthou, terwyl ek nog op skool was, ek dink ek was in matriek gewees, wat ek in 'n situasie was wat dit nou verder develop het, daai besluit wat ek gemaak het, waar ek was geface met 'n situasie van twee mense wat baie naby aan my was, wat adults was. And I had to stand in the gap for them, not knowing where and what to do, but placed in a place where I had to say, now God, you have to please show me what to do. Here, jy moet asseblief intree. En hoe daai mense weggedraai het van hulle lewens neem, en dat hulle situasies omgekeer is. En hulle was Christen persone, hulle het die Here geken. En vir my het dit, ek dink, my finale besluit gemaak. Ek het die Here gevra, ek dink dit was in standaard 7, maar toe in daai matriekjaar het ek vir die Here gesê, ek het U gevra, maar ek wil net seker maak. En dankie Here dat U daai in my lewe gedoen het, dat ek nou kon U teenwoordigheid persoonlik ervaar. And I think for me that is what is able to carry me through sy hand wat persoonlik in my lewe is. As niks en niemand in my omtrek is. Hy is daar verseker, net soos dit hierdie tafel voor my is. I think that there's a very, it's an interesting statement that a typical day for me is chaos. And there's nothing that you can plan for. Which is amazing because God helps you in those situations make it work. But for example, a lot of the work is actually being, one of my mottos is being the hands and feet of God and the Lord. So that means I've got to be there where things happen. So it would be going to see the people in uniform, whether it be at the stations or on the road, or if they're doing roadblocks or whatever. So that would be part and parcel of the day, because it's important that you befriend the people so that they can have trust in you. But often the people don't come to you with something. You've actually got to notice it through the Holy Spirit's prompting. So you actually have to be around. So that would be a large proportion of it, is popping in, seeing how people are. And that's often where social media for me helps as well as my special time with the Lord as well, because that often prompts me with names, with I should go to a certain place or whatever. And invariably when you go there, you find that there's something that God wants you to see, whether it's in somebody's body language or the words they say or the words they don't say. is really amazing. So that would be a part of it. The other part would be if there are incidents, whether it be motor vehicle accidents or people that are trying or wanted to commit suicide or fires or unrest, generally it would be that I would be at the point of where those would be happening. So if there was a possible suicide in the mountains, that's where my beautiful Landy comes involved. It gets me to those places. If there are fires, it gets me into the place where nobody usually can get to see the people in action and actually see the unseen, if that makes sense. And that I've been really, really blessed to have a vehicle that can get me to those places and get me all over. All of those type, or search and rescue where some of those people are missing, to be able to go in and help them, or when there are fires or times where evacuations need to happen, I'm invariably involved there, where I either transport the people out or the injured, or are able to bring a different perspective to the people other than just the technical get the people out as quickly as possible, actually ministering to them in one or other way as you get the people out or as you're on the scene. I think for the initial part of dealing with the people that are involved in those traumas, I think the one is the great and the exclusive necessity of having God's Holy Spirit working through you or working with you, clearing your ears and your senses to be able to pick various things up. Because in each one of those traumatic situations, even if you say the same traumatic situation and three people experiencing exactly the same, all three have a different feeling, a different experience of it, a different effect on their lives, either based on the history that they've had, that they've experienced, or their own personalities and fears in the situation. And I think that's where the most important part is, because if I have to say myself, Mark, what can I say? I would say to you, I don't know. Because I don't have words for somebody who has maybe lost 2 of their children in a drowning. I don't have words for that. Because it's too traumatizing for the person or for yourself. So it's a case of relying on that, going in, and I believe in 2 stages of preparation. The one preparation for me is my general preparation, and that's my relationship with God. And that has to be, to me, is the most important thing in my entire life, actually, because it's that relationship, to be able to hear Him, to be able to trust Him, to be able to give me, if you can call it, the courage. Not the courage to walk into a situation knowing and thinking you're the person who can solve it, because you're not. But the courage to know I can actually get in my Landy and drive and get to the place and know that God is with me. Because that, although often one does feel a form of nervousness because of not knowing what to expect, you know the one who knows everything, the one who knows those people's hearts intensely, better than they know themselves, is going with you. So for me, that is the most important. Then the second part is then the preparation specifically for the incident. So sometimes you get the opportunity within driving in the Landy to be able to have that conversation and allow God to work through you, to, if you can have an idea of a general plan. But then obviously God has to direct that both in the specific preparation as then when you go there. And then working through the various people, because invariably with a traumatic situation there's more than one person. And it's that working with those people, each one noticing what they need, going through the priorities, almost like as paramedics we would look at the most difficult case or the most the sickest case or the most injured case as the first case in priority to deal with and move through. One has to do that in terms of your feelings, and then once that has happened, then and go through there, invariably it's the service providers, would be the nurses or the paramedics or the doctors or the firemen or whoever afterwards. And that's the path that is more a long-standing path that one then would deal with them in terms of the situation. And then it's your self-care afterwards. because then once that has happened, for myself, I've taken on and it doesn't matter how you try not to take it on. There's an element that you do take on because you have to understand the people and what they've gone through. And often I've seen the incident that they've been in. You've dealt with the people, you've dealt with the incident, then you've dealt with the service providers, and in all of them you've taken a bit. And then you need to, in some sort of way, get your own sanity and come to terms with what has just happened, because most of the things that have happened are actually inhumane. And that being, I think it maybe is likened to, not that one wants to think of it that way, but knowing how God's heart must be touched by seeing his people going through pain and suffering. I think it's element of that you also feel when you've seen people, and that I would obviously, in my going away from an incident, that would generally be where God can help work on that for me, as well as in my vehicle. That's my special spot, where generally there's not a lot of people in the vehicle with me when I drive many kilometers. In fact, I do about 1,000 kilometers a week. So that's a lot of time that you can spend within there, and the beautiful environment and how God speaks to me through that to actually wash me, to get me back on the straight and the narrow. I think you hit it straight on the head with it being unhealthy, and it's probably, if one looks at the highest suicide rates in terms of areas within humanity, it's within those service provider areas, particularly because they hold things within inside themselves. It is a necessity to be able to have the facade in order to be able to cope and to be able to function optimally, to either save the life or protect the life, depending on whether it be in law enforcement and traffic and SAPs, or whether it be a paramedic or a fireman or whatever. So it is necessary to be able to get down to your basics of treatment or handle the situation, and that's where I learned in the Defence Force also. You have all the explosions happening around you and all the chaos. You've got to treat your patient, get them out. And then when you're safely sitting in your armchair or wherever you're sitting under the tree and the elements have gone away, then the situation actually hits you. But it's safe to hit you then. But we as service providers often don't end up in that position. You keep it inside you because it's an industry where it's viewed that we have to be macho and that we can't be affected by those kind of things, because people view it, and people in general view it, as being a weakness. And it's in fact the total opposite. And I actually teach the point of that if you are the person that comes to speak, you don't have to do it out in the open, but if you come to speak, you actually are the stronger party, because you're actually making you stronger from that. And I learned that over years from working with the recce's and working with a whole lot of different areas and within the fire services and emergency services, that it's so necessary to have if you can call it debriefing sessions, or and I talk about the general preparation and then the specific preparation for it, where it's necessary to get rid of those things. But you find that and that's where my starting of the NPO and starting with the chaplaincy was so important, because it never was a possibility before. And then you find, to cope, you find a lot of the service providers either turn to the bottle, or they turn to drugs, or self-mutilation, or invariably then take their own lives. Their family environment gets affected, everything, because they bottle up, excuse me, and they like taking a bottle of champagne and having the cork loose and shaking it. Eventually what happens is then when it pops and blows everything out. And then unfortunately it's not a safe environment for them. And that's often where, if they're not exposed to our help, they end up that they don't know, and they're scared. Another reason to be able to open up, because they don't know there's so many things that happen, but there's so many triggers, because they see things every day that trigger them to think about the events that they've had in the past. So you've actually got something that's like a build up over years that's built up within them. But then going back to the treatment side, the first part of it is actually to build a relationship with them, to see that you are real. And that's where I'm privileged to have had, and a lot of the chaplains that I've trained and that work with us are people that have worked in the industry. So they're theologically qualified, but they're also qualified having worked on the road, worked in the emergency services or SAPs or wherever, so that they've got an understanding, so that when starting to talk to the people, we talk and become a friend, so that they can trust me, they trust my staff to understand that we do understand them, but we don't judge them. And then importantly, we often in the initial stages actually take them out of their environment to go and have the chat. But over a period of time, we are actually working with them on the scene. So we're not running away from the scenes that they experience. And then in order, when we start talking to them, they realize they're safe when they start feeling feelings. And we are able to prompt those feelings, but in general communication. And it's a weird type of perspective, because when generally going for counseling, the person asks how you're feeling, and they start talking about going through what you felt and how you see things. But when you start that with emergency services personnel, they run away. They want to know that they're safe, and often a counseling session for me, they won't even know that they've had a counseling session, because we've talked all sorts of different things. And to give an example, in one of the major incidents, in one of the unrests that were had, there were some of the folk that had actually gone through, that they'd had some of their staff hit with axes and all sorts of things like that. And they were badly traumatized, the staff, but they had to go and work. And we started talking about practical things about safety and security. And I was privileged to train the South African SWAT team in my years back. So we were able to chat about some of those practical things, and in that start stimulating their thoughts and their concerns and their fears. And in a practical way, we could start chatting to them and they could open up. But these things are over a period of time that happen. It's not something that generally, unless the Holy Spirit really jumps in and opens those doors, it's a long-standing thing to be able to get people seeing you on the road with them, seeing you having their back, that they start chatting to you. And then you get some of the service providers that know that, and they will see it in one of their friends, and they'll come to you and say, I see so-and-so is having a problem. And then the other thing that we do is to try and help them at their times when they go out, is we try and train them how to prepare yourself for going to an incident. Because that's also important, to prepare your mind so that the effect is not so bad, particularly when the guys are coming in new. They've never seen a dead body before. They've never seen people being mangled. And it's important that they prepare themselves for that. It still affects them, but then in a lesser way. And in our area, in converse to when I was in the East Rand and in Joburg, we've got a lot more incidents that the service providers end up on scene with a family member or somebody that they know, because it's a close environment. And that's another challenge, because now they arrive and it's their aunt that they're having to treat or cut out a vehicle. And that then the treatment is much more intense, because they take it upon themselves as being, they don't take it upon themselves, they feel it themselves, because it's their family member. So they're seeing the pain of a family member rather than somebody that's just somebody that they don't know, which is painful enough. But this is just much worse. Yes, indeed. And I think, again, starting possibly with the practical side, how I start with if you can call it the patient in that case, is I, in a practical way, explain to them what certain feelings they'll start having. So almost prompting them, but maybe firstly starting in a physiological way, which tends to bring some sort of a meaning, because then they understand, for example, how their body is reacting to experiencing the trauma. And that then gets them if you can call it the buy-in, but then they realize that this is a real thing that's happened to me. It's not something that is a hearsay. Then the next step is where one really needs the Holy Spirit's intervention. Again, how different people are different and experience things different. At the end of the day, as you say, they want to understand the reasons behind it, and often, particularly from a spiritual point of view, the question being, where does God fit into this? Because God is my Father, He's the one who created me, He loves me, and how can I be faced with a situation where I've gone through this terrible trauma? A very short example was about 2 years ago, I faced a mom and a dad where they lost both their children in a drowning. It was their only children, and not that makes that much difference, but it was both their children. And the question is how God can let this happen. They're two little ones. And one of the general perspectives, and as I say, it's difficult because each person is different, so one has to allow God to minister through that. But you have to be real, because we often want to if you almost want to say super spiritualize things to get oneself out of the tricky situation. But at the end of the day, the people have to face it. And one of the things that I've come to realize for myself is that being a Christian and being a person that has asked God to be part of my life, an integral part of my life, doesn't mean I'm excluded from living on earth. And one of the thoughts that always comes to mind is, it was a perfect world before Adam and Eve, or when they started off. And certain authorities were given at that particular time that changed things. And the fact that there are traumas out there and pain and suffering is certainly not from God. In God's world, there isn't pain and suffering, and that we will go to when we eventually go home. But being a Christian doesn't eliminate one from experiencing pain and death and suffering. But what does make a difference, and it's given to everybody, but as a Christian, you take it and you embrace it. You take that gift, is the gift that God is with you through it all. So in the terms of those people having lost their two children, and it was incredible how God worked in that way, that they could actually pray with me and actually thank God for the brilliant time that they had and the blessing of having those two children and the time that they could spend on the same day that they lost their children. And that's a miracle in itself, that they were able to experience that. And the amazing thing is they're actually expecting a new little one coming up soon. But the fact of actually saying that God will help you through the process, because my feeling is that God, the gift of Christianity is a gift that is a free gift. It's not like a lot of the other religions that you have to do certain things. God has given us a choice, and it's a choice out of love. And we love Him, and we want to be part of Him. And if we were in a situation where God excluded the Christian from pain and suffering by being a Christian, we wouldn't have any other religions on earth. They would all want to be with God because of the fact that God takes away their pain and suffering, not because they want to have a relationship with Him. And that, I think, is where the difference comes in. It doesn't mean to say He puts us through those things. And I don't know of any situation where I can say He's put people through this. But what I can say is the difference of seeing how He walks the path through them or with them. And incidentally, out of thousands and thousands of incidents that I've been in and had the privilege of working with all the different religions, because again, trauma doesn't stop at one religion, it's universal. So whether it be in a Muslim or a Hindu or a Satanist household or whatever, in all of those situations, trauma happens. And the first thing is that you can clearly see, although every trauma is different, but in the number of years, you can see how trauma is dealt with in one household versus another. You can see a huge difference from a household that knows the Lord in terms of the way they cope, the way they And it's not that other people haven't got the gift, they just have to accept it. And obviously accept him into their lives. But the difference in terms of the way of handling. Another interesting part of that, and you ask about the ministry part, at the end of all of those incidents is usually an opportunity to pray for the person. And obviously during the period of time, the people know where I stand when ministering to them. And I think out of all the years of ministry, I've had, and that's with all religions, probably 3 people that have said they don't want to be prayed for. And they were from a particular denomination that only wanted their minister to pray for them, not another minister. So that means all of the other religions at the time of their trauma, not having forced scripture on them or anything, again being the hands and feet, ministering to the people in their time of trauma practically. Sometimes it's practically saying, do you know, have your family been notified? Who is your support structure? If it's a Muslim person, would you like your imam to be here? I can call them and I can let them be here. Those practical things are for me part and parcel of ministry. It's being the hands and feet. That all of them have said, please pray with me. And they know very well how I'm going to pray. And that to me is really significant and a privilege. That one is able to then minister and culminate it by saying, can we dedicate this to let God actually intervene? And that's in an open way. For me, I still prepare for every situation, and when I go and I pray about it anyway, whether they'd say yes or no. But it's within myself, my own preparation, because God can't be excluded in any of the situations. Otherwise, it will be a disaster.
Ek hoop jy het hierdie eerste video van Mark Robson se getuienis geniet, 'n bietjie agtergrond oor wie Mark is en wat hy doen. In ons volgende video wil ons gaan kyk na spesifieke getuienisse wat hy met ons kan deel, sodat ek en jy saam deur sy getuienisse en deur sy belewennisse bemoedig kan word in die koninkryk van God, oor hoe kundig en hoe diepgaande God besig is in die lewens van mense, ook op plekke waar ons dit nie sal verwag nie. Sien jou in die volgende video.
En elke knie sal buig.